Hey y'all, I'm Josie,
And I'm Vickie.
and today we're going to take storytelling and mattering little by slowly. And so today we had mentioned this topic. I think it had been a few weeks back, and I remember me and Vickie had gotten really excited about it because for me it came up as I was in class, and I think that particular week we had read testimonios, and within Chicano studies, testimonios get used. It's storytelling. It's people's testimonies. They're using it in combination with theory, and it gets used within these academic spaces. And I remember I was talking to Vickie about it. And I remember feeling really frustrated at the fact that like sometimes people's stories aren't taken as a valid source within academic institutions. And when it comes to like research papers and anything like that, like people always want like vetted and like cited sources, and it's like, well, why is it that these stories of people's lived experiences aren't recognized in that same way? And I think for me, I was really stuck on this idea because a fellow classmate had also mentioned how that really dictates whose stories matter and who gets to be heard. And so I was talking to Vickie about that, and Vickie was, per usual, was on the same thought process as I was, but she had a little bit more knowledge on the subject of mattering.
I wouldn't say that I have more knowledge. I feel like we have equal amount of knowledge. I never like to say that I have knowledge on anything because I feel like that leaves me open to like people saying that like I'm some sort of expert, and I'm really not an expert on anything ever in my entire life. But I really love the idea of mattering and storytelling. I think it feels really important to me, and it feels very important to know about, especially being Black and being Mexican, and like not having like the story of like my family or people of the same race as me being told, or ethnicity being told. But I really love the way that Bettina L. Love, she's an author and activist, talks about mattering. And I can like have it like on the screen next to it, so I can give like a quick definition or like quote from her book. I think it's called We Want to Do More Than Survive. But it says, mattering as described by Bettina L. Love is the quest for humanity. And the idea of mattering rests in abolitionist teachings rooted in the internal desire we all have for freedom, joy, restorative justice, and in parentheses it says restoring humanity, not just rules, and to matter to ourselves, our community, our family, and our country, which I feel that I really resonate with and really encompasses what mattering means to me when I think of my loved ones who don't feel heard, or who I feel aren't seen as individuals who matter in society. So yeah, and then that bleeds really nicely into storytelling, because storytelling is I feel a really large part of American history, because you're only given parts of stories, you're only given versions of stories, and that completely shapes the way that everything around you is perceived, and just literally everything that follows.
I think that was the first time that I've heard that explanation of mattering, and I thought it was really beautiful. So thank you for sharing that, and I thought that was really beautiful. I'm like still sitting in it, but yeah, no, I agree. I feel like storytelling and mattering go very much like hand in hand within like as you were saying, like within like American history, and even within like news, even within movies and TV that we watch, like whose stories are being told and in what way are they being told and by who.
Yeah.
Again, I think that's why it's so important, like how you mentioned, when you think about like your family members and like who haven't been heard, and like just even thinking about who was speaking for them, and who is silencing, all very important things that apparently we're gonna dig into.
Yeah, we don't have to go like super deep.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think that So as you all may remember, I'm going to grad school for design and public administration and policy. So I'm learning the ins and outs of the government, but I'm also learning about just to design more equitably and more wholly. And I feel like those are two things that are really important to me and really intertwine with storytelling and mattering, because the way that things are designed have a story to tell and they control what stories are being told. And that could sound really vague if someone is designing, I don't know, like a park or something like that. Sometimes parks are really designed for specific communities and in specific ways that deter other specific communities. There was a couple images that had gone viral of cities doing like anti-homeless benches and stuff. That's controlling someone's narrative, that's controlling someone's life, that's controlling where someone can go, because you're controlling the narrative of what you want your city, your sidewalk, your park to look like. And that was a choice by a designer and a choice by the city. So it's a government and design combined. I don't know. We like, yeah, like I was saying, so I can wrap it around to my initial thought, was that we don't have to go super deep into it. But this is like two things that I'm really, really passionate about and something that I love to take into design and that I don't have the answers to, but I'd love to fully or wholly go into the way storytelling can touch design and can touch people in a way that influences like their healing process and stuff like that.
You want to talk a little bit more about like the healing processes and like how that wrapped into like your work and how you see that playing out?
I can.
Or is that a big question?
No, it's not. I feel like I just did a lot of talking and I don't want to take up all the talking, but I can talk about it really briefly. So I was working on a project my first semester in grad school, and we titled it Tiny Stories About Freedom. And it is, because it's still an ongoing project. We were trying to imagine a more just future, and one that involves the abolition of the carceral system. So we did that through storytelling, and we did that through creating futures. Yeah, creating futures that shaped around something that could be dystopian, or that could be utopian, or it could be something like oddly in the middle, but it was all set in this kind of futuristic landscape. But we all based them on these stories that we wrote about moments in our life, which academically is called autoethnographic writing, which is it's like an anthropological practice where you go in and you observe a community and you write about it from your own personal perspective rather than from like a third lens or from the people's perspective. It's all from you. So we did that, but from our own perspectives. So we just basically wrote about a moment in our life that in kind of like an academic-y sense, but then also with like a little bit of feeling, which I believe is just a really layman's way of saying autoethnographic writing. And then we changed that into a futuristic story. And that was our way of processing that story and processing that trauma, because it was stories about our experiences with carceral systems. And it was really fun and it was really cool. So I just like the idea of using storytelling as a way to process what you're feeling and process your emotions. And I feel once you've told your story and you have people around you who listen to it, it almost feels cathartic and it feels like you're finally mattering. So that's where that all kind of like shapes in. So that's the project I worked on that I'm really passionate about, and I want to continue taking it on even if it might have hit its end, which it could have. I'm interested in kind of playing with the idea of storytelling and mattering and changing it into maybe something else, because I'm also really passionate about futurism and futures and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's really cool. Thanks for sharing that, Vickie. I think that reminds me of where I've been hearing more about storytelling and using it, because the way I've been learning and hearing about storytelling is how we apply it to like our own theory and how that's shaping the way we view and the way we view like our own like academic spaces, I guess. And that's been mainly through this one course that I've been taking that's on reproductive justice, and we've been talking a lot about like mothering and like our sexual education and like all these topics that go into reproductive justices. And a lot of the discussion posts that we've been having have been rooted in text, inspired by the text, but mainly based on our own personal experiences as well. And I thought that was really cool, and I'm really enjoying that. And I feel in doing that, I've been able, through those discussion posts, I've been able to practice my own like storytelling and figuring out like, okay, how does this particular topic relate to me, and how do I see it being played out within my life. And I do think it feels nice because I never dread doing those posts. Like I afterwards I feel very like, okay, like somebody's going to be reading this, probably because it's a course requirement, you have to respond to someone.
Yeah.
um but it feels nice to be able to like put that out there, and like, or like when someone responds and they're like, oh yeah, I can relate to that too, because in my family we did this. And there was one particular week that we were reading stories by Latina authors, and they were just kind of talking about like the way they learned sex ed, and one of them mentioned, again, her mom just left a book in her room, and I was like, yes, okay, I this clicks with me, because that's how my mom did it too. And like, it feels good. It feels good to read something from someone who comes from your own identity group, and like see, and I don't know how to word this, but it feels good. It feels good. That's all I can say. It's just, it feels good. And I think since then I've been thinking like, everyone should have that feeling. Everyone should be able to like read something and see themselves in it, and at any level. At any level.
So what you were saying reminds me of this conversation I had with my dad, where we were talking about this actor in Star Wars. He's from London, so then the UK, and he's from Nigerian descent. I believe his name is John Adedeo Bombadele Adeboyega, if I'm pronouncing that properly. There was a lot of controversy around him being in the Star Wars movies and possibly being a Jedi. I'm not a Star Wars expert, so I actually don't know if he's properly a Jedi. But there was a lot of controversy about a Black person being in the Star Wars universe. And I couldn't figure out why that was even an issue. And my dad said it was because all of the traditionally white fan base were upset that they could no longer see themselves in the characters, which I thought was crazy, that they've had so many years of representation, they've had so many years of being at the forefront of stories, and the like, not the one time, but like this one time that one of the main characters of a Star Wars film was of African descent, just like blew their minds and made it so they feel like they didn't resonate with the films anymore because they didn't see themselves in it. And I feel like that further strengthens your point about how necessary it is to see yourself in films and to see yourself playing like intergalactic superheroes and intergalactic like fighters, because it's important to be able to see someone like you like doing things that you like never thought were possible.
I have some thoughts on like what like you shared, but I also want to take a moment to like,
No.
Vickie went ahead and paused and looked up the name of the actor to make sure that she was going to properly pronounce it. And I think that's still, I wanted to point that out because I think that goes so heavily within like mattering, and like being able to like to have your name pronounced correctly. And even thinking about language and thinking, I think for me, like name pronunciation and language kind of go like hand in hand. And like being able to hear like your name pronounced correctly as it was intended to, and then also being able to like understand things in you as well too. And so I wanted to take a moment to mention that, and how that also goes within mattering. Yeah, I just, that they got, I think it's funny that they got upset because they were no longer going to see themselves in the and as a Jedi, or whatever character it is.
Yeah.
Honestly, at the end of the day, so much film already revolves around white men and white folks, and that's just the fact of the matter. And I feel like there are films There have been films that are supposed to be with the main cast being a person of color, but then production will always try to advocate like, oh, maybe you should put a white person in there instead. And it's like there's just so little, there's such so little representation already, and so little stories being told of people of color. And so going back to what I was saying about saying people's names and language being important, I was thinking about this a lot this past weekend because I went to Delaware and I went with my grandma. And my grandma is a Spanish speaking woman, and I have never traveled with her before. And I don't think I've ever like realized like how frustrating it is to like travel and not within the United States and not speaking English, because like so many things were being like said to her, but she like didn't know like she could figure out like what to do, but that was just based off like looking at people and stuff like that. And so I think about like how important languages and having things accessible within your language contributes to one's self-perception and even like their like sense of mattering, because like if so many things are not like in your language or accessible to you, it's just kind of saying like, okay, this is important but not for you.
I completely agree with that. I feel that that is also really important in like medical settings. I know we talked a little bit about being able to advocate for yourself and knowing your body through sex ed and being fully versed in sex ed last week. But I think that that also follows into this week in the fact that if you don't speak the language that they're speaking at the hospital, you're not able to like advocate for yourself properly. And a lot of the times people just speak around you. I know that happened to my great aunt, or just my aunt, because that's what I call her, my aunt. She doesn't speak English. She's Spanish speaking only. And she had a major procedure, I think like 2 or 3 years ago. And but my mom wasn't able to like go to the hospital with her initially because she was working. But when we were able to go with her, we were kind of asking her like what the doctors had been saying to her and what was going on. And she was just telling us that she honestly had no idea. Like she had gotten a whole procedure and like no one had taken the time to find like a translator for her or properly like explain things to her. She was just kind of like nodding and like agreeing with them because she thought that that would be easier. I think that they like, in my opinion, that feels really irresponsible, and it feels like they didn't really care and they didn't really see her, and that in those moments that she didn't really matter to them. So I feel like I agree with you and I understand what you're saying. And I think that that is something that you wouldn't really think about unless you had like been through the situation or you know someone in the situation who had gone through it. And I agree with you that language and communication have a lot to do with helping someone feel like they matter in a situation and that they're important and that their opinions and thoughts need to be heard.
And I think that goes back to like even like your own personal interest in like design and stuff like that when it comes to like hospitals or airport settings, and like and how things are being designed for folks who don't speak English and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know much about design because I
Yeah.
because of you, I recently found out that somebody has to design buildings and the way vaccine distributions happen and stuff like that. But I would imagine that it would be the same within those
Yeah,
spaces and
definitely.
settings.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really important that people are like fully versed in the community that is being served. I know I forgot what hospital it is. Yeah, I forgot what hospital it is, but there's some hospital that has signage in both Polish, Spanish, and English, which I think is amazing because Chicago has a really large Polish, Latin speaking, and English speaking community. So having signs in all three languages in a hospital setting and different like pamphlets and stuff like that that help explain things is really important. And that's all done by a designer. All those signs, making sure that the fonts are really readable in each language, because obviously different letters and accents are being used in each language, and you can't like use some like crazy Comic Sans for everybody for every language, because then it won't be readable. And I think all of that stuff, like we've been saying this throughout this episode, is that it all leads into making sure that people feel like their existence is just being seen and heard.
I think before we had this conversation, like I didn't think about like how many things lead to that, you know, whether it's like seeing like your language within a medical setting, or seeing yourself being represented in stories, or seeing yourself on the screen, or having your name pronounced correctly. And just like these are all things that I have thought about, but I don't think I've had it like laid out like this, and how that contributes to whether or not one person can feel they matter within the social context, I guess.
Yeah.
I think today, with today's conversation, I feel very much like in awe. I don't know, I feel like there's a lot to think about, and I don't really know where to take this next. Is what I feel.
Yeah, I understand that. I think that's how I felt. I think that's how I felt like I don't know when, because I feel like this has always been at the forefront of my mind, just because have like in my undergraduate, so for because I did 5 years for my undergraduate, I was in the graphic design program, which graphic design, the School of Cinema, Media, and Design is predominantly male and predominantly white male. So I think I'm like losing my train of thought, but concisely what I'm trying to say is that I've always been really, really aware of the lack of representation and the lack of feeling like I matter and feeling like the people around me matter. And in my head, the only way that I can see like kind of furthering this and like the next steps is to just be really loud about your story and be really loud about your experiences, putting it out in as many places as you can. And that's what I try to do in all of my work. I try to put a lot of my personal experiences into almost everything I do, because I don't know, I'm just a biracial girl from Chicago that's not entirely unique. And there has to be other people in the world who relate to my story and relate to my experiences growing up in a Black and Mexican household. And the more like that I talk about my stories, and the more that I like talk about my experiences, the more other people are like, oh, okay, I see that. And then they'll talk about it, and then other people will see it too. So that's like how I've always felt about the next steps. And I'll always seek out other individuals, and I'll make sure that I listen to their stories, because something that I realized and that I learned when working on the Tiny Stories About Freedom Stories project is that we could have been done and felt really satisfied with it after having read our autoethnographic stories to each other, because afterwards we all felt like this kind of sigh of relief, because we all sat there and actively listened and actively felt each other's stories. And it was just the act of feeling seen and heard that made us feel so much better about ourselves and what we had gone through. Just in addition to putting your story out there, just actively listening and actively being really intentional when hearing other people's stories is important too. So I feel like those two things are not necessarily me telling you like, these are your next steps, do them, but like, I'm just saying these are the next steps that I've been doing and that I'm going to continue doing.
Yeah, and what you were describing earlier, not earlier, but within your talk right now, I was just thinking about community, and which is exactly what you were describing. You were describing community and being able to find your community through through storytelling, and building community through these shared experiences.
Mhm.
And so yeah, that really is the next step. And I again, it's so important that you mentioned how equally important it is to listen to other people's stories, to like sit down with them and just like listen to those stories, because as good as it feels for me to get my story out there, again, I want everyone to be able to have that experience, to be able to feel heard, to be able to find that sense of release, in sharing this. Did I say sense of release? I think, yeah, I did say sense of release. That sense of relief of being able to share your, having someone like listen to it, and like, again, like highlighting these stories and pushing for their stories to be heard too. Lots.
And very quickly also telling those stories outside of your community. And I think that's something that I didn't entirely make super clear, but even outside of the community, because people don't know
Yeah.
what they don't know. Not necessarily, you can't blame someone for being ignorant, but like if those individuals haven't been exposed to that, and there has been no reason in the past for them to seek out that information, how are they supposed to know? So it's also important to expose people to your story from outside of your community as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like exposing those stories to folks within like outside of your community. And again, I think about that a lot within like academic spaces, especially like when it comes to talk. There's always conversations about communities and what they should be doing, but there's rarely ever storytelling coming in those spaces, or like people's actual lived experiences. What's it called? The example I had in mind, again, for this reproductive, just for this class that I'm taking right now, we read like this anthology, and it was literally just stories of poor women wanting in their experiences in mothering, and like the whole purpose of it was because they wanted their stories to be told, and they wanted their story, they wanted to be heard, and within that they also discuss like the future and the ways that they can be included within these spaces. So yeah, I think that's what I had in mind when I was talking about that. But I think having people's stories for the sake of being heard is, and for their own liberations in the way that they want it, important.
Yeah, I'd like to, if on our own personal time, if you could send me what you were talking about. I think that's really interesting.
Oh, so I was just going to say the book is called Revolutionary Mothering, and again, it's just an anthology about mothers of color and marginalized mothers, and they tell their stories about mothering, and then the last few chapters are just kind of like about how to transform mothering and to revolutionize it away from the mainstream, and away from what we know now. And so when I think about storytelling within, that is what I have at the forefront of like of how storytelling can be used.
Oh yeah, I will definitely look that up.
I feel like overall, as always, this conversation doesn't like stop here. Definitely want to continue, like you were saying, like listen to others, advocate for my own story to be told, and yeah, think about the ways storytelling can be like this transformative practice. So yeah, and I definitely want to look more into mattering, because I just, again, that was a beautiful explanation of what mattering was, and I'm interested in it now. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all your thoughts today, and for sharing the name of that book. I feel like I really enjoyed this conversation because I got to talk about something that I'm really passionate about, and something that I feel like I can never not be interested in talking about. I don't know if that was redundant. It's kind of redundant, but yeah. So thank you everyone for listening this week, not necessarily watching. And we will see you all next week. Bye.